I'm got late. This is chapter 15, Co-opting the Investigation. Prior to his resignation, Smith had continued to pursue the defense leads that points to an outside intruder being involved in the murder of JonBenét. The Ramsey family, having become acquainted with him through the regular prayer vigils he held outside of their Boulder home, must have felt that a savior had finally come to their rescue. This was the man who had discovered evidence that suggested an intruder had used the train room window well to enter and exit the home, and he supported this theory by pointing to the odd placement of a suitcase directly beneath the window of the basement storage room. Smith had also launched the hypothesis that a stun gun had been used to silence and subdue JonBenét during her abduction from her bedroom. The use of this instrument had left the telltale marks of an electric probes on JonBenét's body, and in his opinion, it was declarative of the existence of an intruder. It was Smith's strongly held belief that a family member would not have required the use of a stun gun to control JonBenét, and thus the evidence that pointed to its existence effectively cleared the family of any involvement in her death. There were a number of prosecutors and investigators in the sheriff's department who believed Smith's theory, and the separation between these agencies and Boulder Police Department investigators continued to widen. Boulder investigators could not understand how Smith and others in his camp excluded certain pieces of physical evidence and behavioral clues that pointed to the family's involvement. In other instances, intruder theorists outright dismissed the opinions of the outside experts who had continued to consult on the case. This included the insight provided by members of the FBI's venerable behavioral analysis and child abduction serial killer units. Their interpretation of the crimes involved in the case led them to a council of Boulder Police Department investigators to continue their inquiry into the family. Despite the contrary opinions, Smith pursued Alex Hunter's charge of investigating the case from the defense perspective. He continued efforts to run a parallel investigation are revealed in a letter that John Ramsey sent to him dated December 18, 1997. A copy of this letter was subsequently forwarded to the Boulder investigators by the DA's office and received on January 6, 1998. The 2.5 pages of typewritten format, Ramsey spells out possible theories that would have prompted an intruder to target his family and the names of other people who could have had motive to harm his daughter. Now people have motive to harm a child. Last I checked, everyone was mad at John Ramsey for trying to grow a brain. John Ramsey pointed to two events that preceded the Christmas holidays that may have triggered someone to commit the crime. The first event was the article that had been published in the Boulder Daily Camera in early December 1996, announcing that his company, Access Graphic, had surpassed the $1 billion mark in sales. He states that he had a strange gut feeling about the publishing of the article and wasn't sure if it was a good idea. There were concerns because it mentioned him by name. He ultimately approved the go-ahead for the article, and in hindsight seemed to be suggesting that the article painted him as a wealthy target of opportunity. Ramsey would later suggest that the ransom demand exhibited the possibility of religious overtones, which arguably would negate the financial motive for this crime. From the onset, many friends and family thought that the $118,000 demand was meager when compared to Ramsey's relative wealth. The second event was JonBenét's public appearance in the Boulder Christmas parade that took place around December 6, 1996. Ramsey indicated that JonBenét had ridden on a car float with 2 or 3 other girls, and that her name had been attached to the side of the car. He described her as looking very pretty and was voicing reluctance for having permitted her participation in the event. He thought that perhaps the intruder had seen her there. I mean, maybe her murderer saw her there. Ramsey then addressed the reference in the ransom note to his Southern heritage and pointed out that he had been raised in Michigan and Nebraska. He had only moved to South Atlanta, Georgia after completing his services in the U.S. Navy, so anyone who was close enough to be familiar with his background would have known that he was not a true Southerner. Yeah, I bet that pissed Patsy Ramsey off. Potential suspects then became the focus of the correspondence, and Ramsey began with an assessment of Bill and Janet McReynolds, also known as Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. He stated that he didn't think he could discount the two as possible suspects and indicated that Bill McReynolds had played Santa Claus at 2 previous holiday parties hosted at his home. He had advised that a dozen or so friends would come to the house, and then Santa would show up as a special treat for the children. JonBenét reportedly was fascinated with Santa, and during one party took him on a tour of the house that included her bedroom and the basement. Ramsey indicated that the basement was usually full of Christmas decorations and presents. The Ramseys had not planned a Christmas party for the 1996 holidays due to the fact that there had already been a surprise 40th birthday party celebration for Patsy, and because the family intended to go on a Disney cruise after spending some time at their vacation home in Michigan. There was a lot going on with the family that season, and another holiday party had not been scheduled for the calendar. McReynolds was reported to have called Patsy Ramsey to see if he could play Santa for her holiday party. McReynolds indicated that Charles Kuralt was in Boulder doing a special program about his portrayal of Santa, and he thought that he might come to the Ramsey party to film the event. He alluded to how nice the family home appeared. Ramsey thought that McReynolds had made a point of calling his wife and inviting himself to their party. Patsy Ramsey reportedly decided to go ahead and put together a party on short notice, inviting their regular group of friends and children. Santa was accompanied for the first time by his wife, who played the role of Mrs. Claus. Ramsey indicated that everything seemed normal at the party, although Mrs. Claus had not been particularly cheerful in portraying her holiday persona. Ramsey stated that Santa acted very frail and needed the assistance of his wife during the evening. He noted that Santa didn't seem to be playing his role very well either, but he wrote it off as McReynolds' feebleness. Santa McReynolds had cancer. This is how John Ramsey treats people with cancer. He contrasted this behavior with what he reported witnessed later that December, when McReynolds was observed to be acting quite spry when standing outside a televised broadcast of the Today Show. Ramsey referenced the bizarre past he would later hear about the McReynolds family, and when he put it all together, he wondered if somehow they could have been involved in the murder of his daughter. He went on to state, whoever had done this was quite clever, and that they seemed to have been trying to be overly clever. Only John's the smartest guy in the room. Ah! JonBenét, your dad's a fucking moron. Ramsey thought that the crime had been well thought out. This is a well thought out crime, guys. He said so. Ramsey thought that the crime had been well thought out and referenced Janet McReynolds' fictional play that she had written about a child's murder. He thought that perhaps she wanted to try the real thing. John Ramsey alluded to McReynolds' presence at his party as being a precursor to the alleged secret visit that Santa was going to make JonBenét on one of the days bracketing Christmas Day. JonBenét reportedly told a childhood friend that Santa was going to pay her a special visit in addition to Christmas morning. 2 verses of Psalms have been circled in a Bible located in John Ramsey's home, and he pointed to these as additional clues left by the intruder. He reported that neither he nor Patsy had ever marked a Bible in their home and wondered why an intruder would leave a ransom note, except for the purpose of leaving clever little clues. John Ramsey also indicated that he had read Psalms 118 was located exactly in the center of the Bible, and that this perhaps accounted for the $118,000 ransom figure. He concluded his assessment with the McReynolds' involvement by opining that perhaps the real signature of the ransom note was SBJC and rather than SBTC. John Ramsey suggested that he could be interpreting it as an acronym for Santa Bill and Janet Claus. Former employees of Access Graphics became the next focus of Ramsey's lists of possible suspects and leads, and he mentioned two people that he himself had a hand in terminating from the company. He then named two men who had been mentioned early in the inquiry, people who may have been indirectly angry with him as a CEO and who had permitted their firing. Jeff Merrick, Jim Marino, and Mike Glenn had been introduced into the company by Ramsey, but were eventually terminated by Ramsey. Each of the men apparently thought that John Ramsey should have intervened in their personal matters. Ramsey indicated that he found it difficult to believe that any of these men would have been involved in the murder of his daughter, but of all the three, he was suspicious of the wife of Merrick. He thought she could have been angry at him over her husband's situation. The last suspect named in John Ramsey's letter was the woman with whom he had an affair. He indicated that he had not seen or heard from her in 20 years and that it was difficult for him to imagine that she could have been involved. He provided the names of a couple who might have been able to determine her current whereabouts and concluded by indicating that it might be possible that she was vengeful about his meeting and subsequent marriage to Patsy. John Ramsey signed off his personal correspondence expressing the hope that Smith and his family were well and that he would be able to spend some time with them. Further, he expressed his and Patsy's thanks that Smith had come into their lives at that time. Boulder investigators were growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of any real progress in their investigation. It seems certain members of the DA's office were bent on crippling their efforts to pursue the leads in the case. Routine search warrants and records had been denied, and evidence had been unearthed by investigators that pointed to family involvement was deemed insignificant by prosecutors and the very people who were supposed to have been their allies in the pursuit of the truth on the matter. The media leaks continued, and men and women of the Boulder Police Department were portrayed as inexperienced. Boulder Police Department were portrayed as inexperienced, incompetent, and biased in their singular opinion that the evidence collected in the case continued to lead them to believe that a family member had been involved in John Bonet's murder. The leadership of the department remained silent on the public front, not able to compromise the details of an ongoing criminal investigation. But that did not assuage the demoralized investigators who worked tirelessly to solve the murder of a 6-year-old girl. The media would not hear of all the other intruder leads that Boulder investigators would be pursuing in their search for answers. Boulder investigators had been asking for a grand jury investigation from the early onset of the case, as early as January 1997. There was a need to compel testimony from people who were refusing to cooperate and to secure the information of witnesses while it was still fresh in their memories. That's John Ramsey's favorite excuse. He's old. He doesn't remember. He ran out of important meetings. It was not a novel idea. Many judicial districts brought murder cases before their sitting grand juries because of the board reaching powers associated with their investigative authority. Witnesses, adverse or otherwise, could be compelled to testify, and subpoenas could be issued and directed the production of records deemed probative in the inquiry. For some unknown reason, the DA's office balked at the idea. Apparently, Hunter's office preferred to let the gulf widen between his agency and the members of the police department who were statutorily charged with the investigation of the murder. Law enforcement agencies investigated crimes committed within their jurisdiction. District attorneys' offices were responsible for prosecuting defendants who were ultimately charged with the legal threshold of probable cause. Hunter seemed content with letting confusion reign, and the animosity between police investigators and his office continued to build. As noted in Steve Thomas's letter of resignation, the level of frustration amongst the Boulder Police Department investigators was reaching epidemic proportions. The Ramseys had not been charged in any crime, and yet their cadre of attorneys were making demands exclusively reserved to the rights of a criminal defendant. The analysis of physical evidence that could move the case forward was put on hold, and investigators were constantly reminded that the politically influential team of the Ramseys attorneys were a power unto themselves. From an outsider's perspective, it seemed that the DA's office was afraid to go head-to-head with the defense team that had been assembled in this case. Tom Wickman was a friend and former colleague of mine, and he had come to Tellerode on many occasions over the years to work as a reserve officer for me during the summer of music festivals. As a detective sergeant, he was assumed responsibility for the overseeing of the murder investigation of Larry Mason and had been removed from the case, wrongly accused of leaking information to the media. Wickman was tight-lipped about the inquiry, but he once shared with me his frustrations that had run to a boiling point on one particular day. The men and women under his command had been running their tails into the ground, working untold hours, and in their minds their efforts had been fruitless. Taking in the disparaging look on the faces of his team, Wickman decided to close the doors of the unit for the afternoon. Submitting their leave request, the team snuck out the back door of the department and reconvened at the movie theater. They took in a matinee movie, the topic of which was an uplifting crime drama that depicted the good guys triumphing over evil, something that doesn't always happen in the real world. I can't tell you how impressed I was by Tom's willingness to take a command decision and retreat from the front of the battle for a short period of time. Boulder police had been continuously berated and hounded by the press, and they were risking being followed whenever they left the building. His decision served to lift up the spirits of his fellow investigators and gave them the hope of starting the new day. Having secured a sympathetic ear in the prosecutor's office, John Ramsey took the next step to further distance himself from the Boulder Police Department and from the lead role they held in the investigation of the murder of his daughter. He crafted a personal handwritten letter to Alex Hunter on April 1998 that purportedly bypassed his team of attorneys. It was one of the documents that I would eventually review during my participation in the case, and it would have been forwarded to the Boulder Police Department. On May 4th, 1998, Mark Beckner, then the command and with the department, had assembled the investigators assigned to the murder case and explained some of the exchanges that had apparently taken place between the Ramsey team and the district attorney's office. A copy of John Ramsey's letter, unknown to the team prior to the time, was effectively entered into the record. This letter was effectively signaling the end of Boulder Police Department's primary and statutory role in the murder investigation of John Ramsey. The following year, in May 1999, Hunter would publicly announce that Burke Ramsey, according to him, was not a suspect in his sister's death. It was reported in the Denver media that he was prompted to make this announcement after supermarket tabloids had pointed the finger at Burke Ramsey as being solely responsible for the murder of John Bonet. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. It was reported in the Denver media that he was prompted to make this announcement after the supermarket tabloids had pointed the finger at Burke Ramsey as being responsible for the murder of John Bonet. In this time frame, it was announced that the Ramsey family had hired civil attorney L. Lynn Wood of Atlanta, Georgia, to represent their interest in pursuing legal action against the media outlets who were slandering the family. Wood eventually filed a number of lawsuits on behalf of the family in the years that followed. If I could speak to John and Patsy Ramsey, I'd tell them to quit hiding behind their attorneys, quit hiding behind their PR firm, come back to Colorado, work with us to find the killers in this case, no matter where the trail may lead. This was by Colorado Governor Bill Owens, quoted during a Barbara Walters interview aired on ABC News, March 17th, the year 2000. Chapter 16, Behind Closed Doors. Lead investigators in the case had begun to contemplate the use of a grand jury as early as January 1997. When members of the immediate family and many other potential witnesses began to lawyer up, as it is sometimes called in the street language of police officers, they also began to experience this phenomena with those who were refusing to speak with the official record due to the publicity the case was attracting. No witnesses with credible information wanted to be subjected to the experience of the news crew being stationed outside of their home or business for days on end. After many debates and arguments over this issue, the Boulder Police Department investigators were belatedly granted their wish on March 12, 1998, when the city of Boulder issued the following press release. Boulder Police Chief Tom Kobe and Commander Mark Beckner today requested and recommended that the Boulder District Attorney convene a grand jury investigation into the homicide of John Bonet Ramsey. While there is still some investigation left to be done, both Chief Kobe and Commander Beckner believe the investigation has progressed to the point at which the authority of a grand jury is necessary in order to complete an investigation. A grand jury can be utilized to obtain sworn testimony, to obtain other items of evidentiary value not otherwise available through routine investigative methods, and to review the case for purposes of seeking an indictment after the person or persons responsible for the death of John Bonet. Commander Beckner has worked closely with the District Attorney's Office in recent weeks in preparation of the commendation for a grand jury. According to Beckner, we only make this recommendation after 14 grueling months of investigation, much considered and thought, and after consultation with attorneys familiar with and experienced in the use of grand juries. We believe the investigation reached the point at which a grand jury will be very helpful in completing the investigation, thus our recommendation to the district attorney. As the investigation progressed in the recent weeks, the direction of the investigation became very clear. As stated in December 5th, 1997 news conference, the police were working with one of the three options: seek an arrest warrant and prosecution ask for a grand jury investigation, or inactivate the case until such time that additional information became available. Out of task list that has grown to 90 tasks, 64 tasks have been completed or worked on throughout as possible. The longer we work on the case, the clearer it became that inactivating the case would not be appropriate, said Beckner. The appropriate step at this time was to ask a grand jury to assist us in gathering additional admissible evidence. The next step will be for the police to assist the district attorney's office in the review of the case and files and evidence. Attorney's office in the review of the case Given the volume of information gathered today, it is expected that it will take some time for the district attorney's office to complete its review of the case files prior to any decisions being made. We have worked well with the DA's office in the last 5 months, and I expect to work even closer in the months to follow, added Beckner. City of Boulder Press Release Number 65. As noted in the previous chapter, District Attorney Alex Hunter responded to this public request by saying that he needed the Boulder Police Department to present the details of their investigation to his staff before he was willing to convene a grand jury in the matter. This presentation took place over the course of 2 days in the early June 1998. The Ramseys apparently decided it was time to get their story on the record as well and agreed to participate in another round of interviews that the DA's office arranged later that month. It would be the first formal law enforcement interview they had participated in since speaking to the Boulder detectives in April 1997. On August 12, 1998, Hunter announced that he was not ready to present the JonBenét murder case to the Boulder County grand jury. Fleet and Priscilla White responded to this news by authoring a second letter to the public dated August 17, 1998. It called for the appointment of a special prosecutor in the case. Their first letter had been published in January 1998, and it had urged the then Governor Roy Romer to appoint the Colorado Attorney General as a special prosecutor in the case, citing malfeasance on the part of Hunter's office. Governor Romer declined to intervene in either instance, but prior to the publication of the White's August letter, Hunter's office had engaged the services of a former grand jury specialist from the Denver District Attorney's Office to serve as lead attorney in his grand jury inquiry. Michael Kane, working as the Deputy Director of Taxation in the Pennsylvania State Department of Revenue after leaving the Denver DA's office, had returned to Colorado in time to observe Boulder Police Department's 2-day presentation in early January. He would also personally participate in the Ramsey interviews that took place over 3 consecutive days at the end of June 1998. Kane supplanted 2 of Hunter's key prosecutors, Pete Hofstorm and Tripp DeMuth, then taking the lead role in the grand jury inquiry in the investigation. Veteran prosecutors from adjoining jurisdictions were selected to serve as advisory counsel, and they included Mitch Morrissey of the Denver's DA's office and Bruce Levin of the Adams County DA's office. A series of questions were posed to 60 potential jurors in open courtroom proceedings that took place during the summer of 1998. By September 16th, a panel of 12 grand jurors and 4 alternates were seated, and they began to hear the first hours of testimony in the JonBenét murder investigation. Nearly 8 hours of procedural briefings and introductory testimonial consumed the first days of the case. The news media was encamped in the parking lots fronting the Boulder County Justice Center, and their cameras would come to life every time a potential witness entered or exited the Greystone building. Their vigil would continue for longer than anyone expected. Given the history of the case, it would not have been possible for the opening day of the grand jury murder inquiry to have passed without some type of controversy. In the first hour of its birth, a Boulder man summoned the Justice Center as a potential juror. A Boulder man summoned to the Justice Center as a potential juror in an unrelated case reportedly walked past a retinue of Ramsey reporters and photographers with his middle finger raised in salute, muttering slurs and epithets. After a couple of attempts, he apparently was successful at grabbing and smashing the camera of one of the photographers covering the scene. The man was subsequently charged with harassment and disorderly conduct. It is unknown at this writing if he was ever chosen to serve as a juror on the case for which he had received a jury summons. In additional news, the Denver Post reported that there was a new impaneling grand jury. The newly impaneled grand jury was expected to review fiber evidence that was linked to the clothing of Patsy Ramsey and to the duct tape found on her daughter's body. The fiber was discovered in recent months, long after the killing, sources said. The article proceeded to cover the legal complications involved in the late discovery of evidence and chastised the police for the inability to have uncovered the fiber early in the investigation. An Atlanta TV station was also cited as reporting that Boulder authorities had been considering the exhumation of JonBenét's body for further forensic testing. Boulder City officials denied the report, indicating that police knew of no court order or court order in progress. What would direct the examination? Boulder City officials denied the report, indicating the police knew of no court order or court order in progress that would direct the exhumation of JonBenét's body. The article pointed out, however, that Alex Hunter had stated in January 1998 that he was considering exhuming JonBenét's body if that was what was necessary in the search for the truth. The details surrounding this report were not fully disclosed, but there had been some discussion amongst investigators and prosecutors at the time as to whether the body should be exhumed to conduct microscopic examination of the skin cells at the site of the suspected stun gun injuries. It was eventually determined that the forensic examination of these injuries would not have been probative into the inquiry. The grand jury met twice a week in the early stages of their investigation. At times, witnesses would enter and exit through the front doors of the Justice Center in plain view of anyone present. On other occasions, witnesses were driven to the building in the rear of unmarked vehicles with tinted windows. Their entry and exit to the proceedings took place through the underground parking garage of the building and the back hallways of the secured interior of the Criminal Justice Center complex. It was a game of cat and mouse for the journalists attempting to cover the progress of the case. They were frequently attempting to determine the identity of the persons who had appeared before the grand jury that day, and what relevant facts they had to offer in the inquiry into the murder of an innocent 6-year-old child. Speculation and rumor led the headlines for the day. It only took 15 minutes for the media to arrive at 755 15th Street on the morning of October 30th, 1998. After grand jurors had been delivered to the Ramsey home to inspect the scene of the crime, prosecutors lingered in the yard as reporters and photographers observed from an improved distance of 100 feet. The finders of fact meander through the curtilage and premises of JonBenét's last abode. Nearly 2 hours and 20 minutes had elapsed as the men and women of the Boulder County Grand Jury explored the scene where a brutal murder had taken place 22 months prior. Concluding their individual inspection of the home, the jurors silently boarded the Boulder County Sheriff's Department Carport vans and departed the scene with a different perspective. The media reported on two different aspects of this visit to the crime scene. The Rocky Mountain News quoted the views as two separate legal experts on the matter. One expert thought the visit to the crime scene was very unusual and went on to proclaim that if the jury had enough to indict, you don't need to tour the house. A contrasting opinion was offered by a local University of Colorado Law School instructor who opined that there was nothing startling about the visit. This gives them an idea of how isolated the various rooms from each other are, that it would be easy for noises to happen in the vicinity of JonBenét's room that the parents wouldn't necessarily hear, and it's good for them to get a feel for that. On December 28, 1998, Boulder's Daily Camera reported that a grand jury would be taking a month-long break until January. John Ramsey's attorney, Hal Haddon, expressed disappointment at the pace of the investigation. We were hopeful that it would move faster, but I have no idea why they have recessed, so I'm not critical of it. Haddon went on to state that no member of the Ramsey's family had received a subpoena to testify before the grand jury. Haddon went on to state that no member of the Ramsey family had received a subpoena to testify before the grand jury. It wouldn't become public information until more than a year later, but in February 1999, Alex Hunter obtained a court order seeking to prohibit Lou Schmidt's request to testify before the grand jury about his intruder theory. With the assistance of former El Paso County District Attorney Bob Russell, the former public defendant Greg Walta, Schmidt overturned the court order that prevented him from voicing his opinion on the matter. The Rocky Mountain News reported on the matter. Schmidt's attorney accused Hunter of not wanting to give the grand jury all of the facts in the case according to court documents. Authorities have named only JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy Ramseys, as suspects in the case. The prosecution is either intentionally or unintentionally emphasizing and focusing upon evidence which points to the involvement of the Ramsey family and is not presenting clear evidence of involvement of an intruder in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, attorney Greg Walter argued in court documents. A source close to the investigation explained Hunter's reasons for seeking the prohibition of his former investigator's testimony. He was concerned that Schmidt would only offer his theories about the case and no factual evidence to the grand jury. That's exactly what he did. Schmidt eventually presented his intruder theory to the grand jury in March 1999. He later stated that he quit the DA's office in part because he believed Boulder police and prosecutors had developed tunnel vision and were focusing only on the Ramsey's families and not on other suspects. The Boulder grand jury was reported to have ended their spring session of 1999, not long after hearing the testimony of Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother, who was 9 years old at the time of the murder. Jurors took a summer hiatus of nearly 4 months after the May 25th meeting. Late in September 1999, Rocky Mountain News staff writer Charlie Brennan reported that an 18-month term of the grand jury was due to expire on October 20th and that it was unclear who would be the next testifying before the panel. Brennan reported that former FBI profiler John Douglas had previously stated he believed the crime had been committed by someone outside of the family, possibly by someone with a business-related grudge against John Ramsey. Brennan noted, however, that interviews with executives of Ramsey's former employer, Access Graphics, revealed that no one from the company had been called to testify before the grand jury. Denver Media Legal Analysis Scott Robinson thought that information was relevant, and he believed that the investigation was focused somewhere elsewhere in search of JonBenét's killer. Some of these witnesses here were reported to have testified before the grand jury up to this point at time were listed as followed. Mike Arucula, John Ramsey's pilot. He's so untrustworthy, but John Ramsey trusted him with his life when he needed to flee his house on the day his daughter went missing. Okay. Linda Art, Boulder Police Department detective. Dr. Francisco Booth, John Bonet's pediatrician that she visited over 30 times. Debbie Chavez, CBI forensic experts. John Douglas, retired FBI profiler. Michael Everett, Boulder Police Department, CSI. John and Barbara Fernie, former friends of the Ramsey family. Rick French, Boulder Police Department officer, first on the scene. Ron Gosage, Boulder Police Department detective. Pam Griffin, supposedly Ramsey family friend and beauty pageant seamstress. Jane Harmer, Boulder Police Department detective. George Herrera, CBI fingerprint expert. Linda Hoffman Pugh, Ramsey's housekeeper and accused suspect. Reverend Roald Halverstock, Ramsey's pastor. Larry Mason, Boulder Police Department detective sergeant. Dr. John Meyer, Boulder County coroner. Fred Patterson, Boulder Police Department detective. Carol Perittle, John Bonet's third grade teacher. Merv Pugh, husband of Ramsey's housekeeper Linda Hoffman Pugh. Burke Ramsey, older brother of John Bonet. Lou Schmidt, Boulder Police DA investigator. Tom Trujillo, Boulder Police Department detective. Chet Ubowski, CBI handwriting analysis. Barry Weiss, Boulder Police CSI. Fleet and Priscilla White, supposed Ramsey family friends. Tom Wickman, Boulder Police Department detective sergeant. On October 1st, 1999, the Denver Post reported that the grand jury was prepared to hear from people considered to be the Ramsey supporters. Private investigator Ellis Armstrong worked for the Ramsey attorneys for nearly the outset of the case and had been observed walking into a grand jury prep room and walking from the direction of the Boulder District Attorney's office about an hour later. Close friends of and supporter Susan Stein was said to have testified the week prior. The Ramseys had delivered a Christmas present to the Stein residence after leaving the Whites' party on Christmas night. Susan was described as a staunch defender of Patsy Ramsey, and she and her husband had moved to Georgia with the Ramseys when they left Boulder. The paper also reported that John Ramsey's older children, John, Andrew, and Melinda, were expected to testify on Thursday of that week. Though not in the home on the night of the murder, they could possibly answer questions about the relationships of the family. Legal analysis theorized that the appearances of witnesses friendly to the Ramseys suggested that investigators were looking for suspects outside of the family. Friends might be able to point things that arouse their suspicion and provide detectives with new leads. Though they were prepared to testify in the matter, neither Patsy or John Ramsey was reported to have appeared before the grand jury during their investigation. On October 13, 1999, 13 months after being convened, Alex Hunter held a press conference and stated that the grand jury had concluded its inquiry into the murder of John Bonet Ramsey, and that no charges had been filed. He went on to indicate that prosecutors do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who had been investigated at the present time. The panel of grand juries investigating the murder had been dismissed and no report had been issued by their body. Hunter reportedly vowed that the proceedings would remain secret forever and that juries were prohibited from speaking about the details of their participation in the investigation. Mark Beckner, now the police chief of Boulder, issued a statement 2 days later. He thanked the grand jurors for their service to the community and went on to praise the special prosecutors who had led the grand jury through its work. Commenting on speculation that charges had not been filed because of reluctance on the part of the district attorney's office, Beckner noticed 3 experienced prosecutors had worked on the grand jury investigation. Nuh-uh. According to John Ramsey, you're all incompetent. Inexperienced, incompetent buffooneries. He claims that to this day. He is the pinnacle of all opinions. Michael Caine, the special prosecutor who led the grand jury, returned to his home in Pennsylvania, a tired and frustrated man. In an interview conducted nearly 2 years later, Caine told Rocky Mountain News staff writer Charlie Brennan that he still thought about the murder case every day. And at least once a week when I'm running or something, the case will be running through my mind and I think, what if we did this now? Or what if that happened? Caine had the opportunity to interview the Ramseys on 2 occasions, the first when he joined Hunter's team in June 1998 and assisted Lou Smit with the family interviews arranged by the DA's office. The second occasion took place in August 2000 when he traveled to Atlanta with Mark Beckner to participate in interviews taking place in the offices of the Ramseys' attorney Lynn Wood. Caine indicated that he had spent many hours questioning the Ramseys and believed they had yet to give him a straight story. It was his impression that he felt that he was talking to a press secretary who was giving responses with a spin. I felt like their answers were very careful and in some cases scripted, and that causes me a lot of concern. The August 2000 interviews had been arranged so the police could explain the evidence that placed the Ramseys under suspicion and explore whether the family had any explanations for some of the evidence. Caine Wood went head-to-head on 1 or more occasions during the interviews. Caine took exception to Wood's interjections during some questions and accused him of obstructing his questioning. Wood responded by calling Caine's line of questioning as irrelevant and referred to one particular question about Burke's school security as a disgusting tactic of an overzealous prosecutor. Caine had encouraged Wood to accompany him to a judge's chambers and seek public disclosure of the grand jury records. Wood responded affirmatively to the suggestion, but there was never any follow-up on the proposal. The August interviews were characterized by both police and Wood as non-productive and marked the end of Caine's official involvement in the murder investigation. He told Brennan in his 2001 interview that he thought a major problem with the case was that the prosecutors had failed to initiate a grand jury and should have been impaneled promptly, not necessarily with the intent to break or to seek a quick indictment, but to use a broad range of subpoena powers. Reluctant witnesses could have been compelled to testify, and records of a personal and business nature could have been obtained in a more timely fashion. Caine indicated that despite the numerous books and media stories that had covered the investigation, the public was not fully aware of the real facts of the case. There remains dozens of secrets, and what the public thinks is fact is simply not fact. After a year and a half spent focusing on nothing but the murder case, Caine indicated that he was burnt out from the cat and mouse aspects of the case. He found it rewarding, but was glad to have been able to take a break from the frustrations of the investigation. Chapter 17, To Tell the Truth. The polygraph has been a tool used by law enforcement investigators for decades, and is an instrument that relies upon the physiological responses of an individual who undergoes questioning while attached to a machine. It is intended to tell the examiner whether or not someone is being truthful during the testing process. The polygraph machine tests 3 aspects of the human physiology: respiration, changes in skin resistance, skin conductance, relative blood volume, and pulse rate. The lie is purportedly detected by physiological changes taking place in the body when a person is not being truthful. The premise being that when a person is deceptive, there's a number of physiological changes that occur, such as an increase and decrease of blood volume being pumped through the body, an increase or decrease in the heart, and changes in respiration and perspiration. When a person is being truthful, the body functions within its normal patterns with no significant changes. The polygraph examiner helps determine this baseline of physiological behavior physiological behavior by asking questions for which a truthful response is expected, i.e., how old are you? Do you live at 123 Oak Street, anywhere, USA? What is your name? Changes in physiological conditions are graphed throughout the questioning. An alteration or significant and consistent changes in a person's responses may be indicative of deception. It is important to note that many studies have taken place over the years to help determine the reliability and the veracity of polygraph testing. There are many different factors that come into play when deciding whether the results of a polygraph test can be relied upon to determine the truth of the matter. Despite the studies that have been completed to date, there continues to be a debate about the accuracy of polygraph exams. While it has been stated that the polygraph technique is highly accurate, it is also to be recognized that it is not infallible, and errors can and do occur when the examiner is interpreting the data collected during a test. Like the situation in which an inexperienced physician can misdiagnose an X-ray, so too can a polygraph examiner misread a chart if there's insufficient experience coming into play. Most errors point to inexperienced polygraph examiners. And despite the evidence that points to credibility of polygraph testing, there are many people who claim to be able to teach methods and techniques that will help someone successfully beat the machine. The internet is full of websites that claim to offer the service. The American Polygraph Association notes admissibility of polygraph tests results vary from state to state and from one federal circuit court to another. A judge is usually the final arbiter. The final arbiter when it comes to admitting polygraph test results in a court of law. Most frequently, both sides must stipulate in advance of any test that polygraph results will be permitted to be entered into record of the case being heard before the court. In Colorado, it is extremely rare to see polygraph results considered during the prosecution of a criminal case. The polygraph is more typically used as an investigative tool, and test results are frequently utilized during the interview that immediately follows an examination. The subject of the interview may be questioned more thoroughly about indications of deception on certain questions that were asked during the testing process. The success of rooting out deception that has been uncovered during the polygraph examination is often determined by the experience and skill of the trained police interrogator. An admission of guilt must accompany a deceptive polygraph exam, for it is not possible to waive the test results of a lying suspect in front of a prosecutor and expect that criminal charges will be filed. It is just not going to happen in today's environment. Boulder's investigators were fully conversant with the situation when they had their first opportunity to conduct follow-up interviews with John and Patsy Ramsey in April 1997. Treading lightly in his approach on the topic, Steve Thomas indicated that he was attempting to take possible suspects out of the bucket so that he could focus his efforts on those who had declined to clear themselves into the involvement in the case. He didn't specifically ask either of the parents during their interview if they would submit to polygraph testing, but wanted to know how the test results would turn out if they did take the test. John Ramsey indicated that he had been told that he should not take the test because of the tremendous amount of guilt he was harboring for failing to protect his daughter. This feeling of guilt and the strong emotions he was experiencing might impact the test results. He went on to say that he had not killed JonBenét and that if the polygraph was accurate, he would pass it 100%. Thomas pressed the issue and asked John Ramsey if he would at some point take the polygraph test. John Ramsey replied that he would be insulted. He's insulted. You insult him. if asked to take a polygraph, and though he was willing to follow any recommendations made by his attorneys, he objected to the way he thought the police were trying to characterize him and his wife in the matter. He expressed the opinion that the police were on course of tragic misdirection by spending time investigating him and Patsy for possible involvement in the murder of their daughter. Patsy was asked a similar set of questions regarding the polygraph examination, and she indicated that she was telling the truth. She stated that she didn't know how the polygraphs work, but that they tell the truth, and that she would be telling the truth. When asked specifically if she would pass the polygraph test, Patsy replied by saying, "Yes, I would pass it. I'll take 10 of them. I don't care, do whatever you want." The topic of polygraphs remained dormant for about 40 months that followed the death of JonBenet. It was not until after the grand jury had concluded their inquiry into the matter that Ramsey's attorneys considered using a lie detector for their clients. When answering questions posed by the media during the release of their book, The Death of Innocence, in March 2000, the Ramsey indicated that they had never taken a polygraph in relation to the murder investigation of their daughter. At one point during the interviews, however, they stated that they were now willing to do so. Oh, they're willing to do so? John said so himself. Where are we at, though? Let's go. Be about it. You're still alive, John Ramsey. Honor your daughter. Take a fucking test, bro. This dude's full of shit. I hate this. Chief Beckner decided to take them up on their offer not long thereafter, and after consulting the DA's office and FBI, indicated in an April 11, 2000 press release that he was willing to accept their conditions. They got conditions! Oh shit! Beckner indicated that Ramsey's attorney had been notified of the acceptance of the offer and was awaiting a reply to schedule a date for the exam. Negotiations appeared to have broken down in the interim, and the city of Boulder issued another press release on April 25, 2000. After several discussions with the Boulder police, an attorney for John Ramsey today informed Police Chief Mark Beckner that the Ramseys will not take a polygraph examinations. On April 11, 2000, the Boulder Police Department accepted John and Patsy's public offer to take public polygraph examinations regarding the death of their daughter, JonBenet. The department agreed to the conditions as set forth by John Ramsey in a March 23rd television interview as follows. These are his stupid conditions. The exam must be conducted by an examiner independent of the Boulder Police Department. They did that. The exam must be conducted in Atlanta. They offered that. The result of the exam must be made public. And I believe that's where they lost the Ramseys. Boulder police arranged to have the FBI specialist conduct examination in Atlanta. After consulting with others in law enforcement, Boulder police selected an FBI polygraphers specifically for their international reputation in criminal polygraphs and their independence from the Boulder Police Department. Other factors that weighed heavily in selecting the FBI were specialist training received by FBI examiners, the quality control implemented in their examination, and supervisory oversight that it provided for every exam. During subsequent discussion, John Ramsey's attorney, Lynn Wood, told Boulder police that John Ramsey was reluctant to take an exam administered by the FBI, as he believed involvement of the FBI and the FBI laboratories in the JonBenet Ramsey murder investigation prevented them from being independent examiners. As a compromise to the Ramseys' concerns, the FBI agreed to assign an examiner who had no prior knowledge or involvement in the Ramsey case, and the Boulder Police Department agreed not to be involved in selecting the specific FBI examiners. This did not satisfy John Ramsey's concern with the FBI's involvement and the Boulder Police Department. is not willing to further compromise the issue, so there will be no polygraph exams at this time. Beckner was quoted as saying that he was disappointed that John Ramsey had declined to take the polygraph examination after publicly saying that he would. Ramsey attorney Lin Wood was hesitant to accept Beckner's offer when he learned that the FBI's protocol for the polygraph examination were typically involved pre- and post-testing interviews. Subjugating his clients to another series of interviews was not part of his agenda, and he countered by offering to have the Ramseys tested by someone other than the FBI. I swear to God, the white privilege in this shit is driving me nuts. He claimed that the Bureau of Investigations had been assisting the Boulder Police Department throughout the entirety course of their investigation, and that he didn't consider them to be neutral parties on the matter. Wood didn't trust federal authorities based on his prior experience with the FBI when defending accused Atlanta bomber Richard Jewell. He thought that the Boulder Police Department's conditions for the polygraph testing was unfair. Further, he was insisting that the Boulder police take the parents off the suspect list if they were able to successfully pass their tests. Mark Beckner balked at the idea. Investigators believed it was important to carefully craft these types of questions that would be posed to each of the parents during the examination, and there were too many variables to consider if someone unfamiliar with the details of the investigation were to run the test. Besides, there were too many things that had been uncovered in the investigation to remove the parents from the umbrella of suspicion. Their passing of the polygraph test was not likely to convince the investigators of their innocence. The ball was now in Lin Wood and John Ramsey's court. His clients had volunteered to take the polygraph examination and had offered to make the details public. Some in the media quietly debated whether the Ramseys had been experimenting with polygraphs before the topic was ever raised during the press conference that announced the release of their book. Wood declined Beckner's offer to participate in the FBI test, but was now beginning to feel the heat was building with the media. He had to do something, and outside of the scope of public scrutiny, proceeded to hire a private examiner from New Jersey to carry out the testing. Wood subsequently held a press conference about a month later, on May 24, 2000, pointing out that his clients had never actually been asked by the police investigators to take a polygraph during their interviews being conducted in the death of their daughter. Wood quoted portions of the April 30th, 1997 interview transcripts with Ramsey, during which time they had been asked how they might do on a test if taken. Relevant portions of those questions are being referenced above. Wood seemed to be trying to make the point that the police had never asked the Ramseys to submit to polygraph testing, and that it was their idea to clear themselves of involvement of the crime by taking a lie detector exam. Well, that's a lie. John Ramsey out here lying. Native Americans, we don't trust white men, and this is why. This is how they treat their daughters. Wood pointed out the topic of polygraphs had not been raised at all during the family's second set of interviews arranged by the DA's office in June 1998. Wood reported that the polygraph examiner who conducted the first test of John and Patsy, Jerry Torriello, determined the results to be inconclusive. Torriello reportedly didn't think he should conduct follow-up tests and pointed Lin Wood to Edward Gelb, a man recognized nationally as an expert in the field of polygraphs. Torriello's absence at the press conference was explained by Wood to be due to his recent medical procedure, and he proceeded to introduce Gelb to the press corps gathered for the conference. He let Gelb speak to his area of expertise and outlined the testing procedures that he had used in his examination of the Ramseys. Gelb cut to the chase and listed the questions that had been individually posed to John and Patsy Ramsey. Conclusion: based on the numerical scoring of examinations in the series, John Ramsey... Oh, well, I don't have to read this. This is some random the Ramseys hired. The first test was inconclusive, and that's what the grand jury listened to. This is bullshit. Now the quality control of polygraph examinations, a lot is dependent upon the adequacy of your case information, the strength of the issue concerned, the distinctness of the issue concerned, in order to try to eliminate inconclusive polygraph examination results. Baxter spoke a little about comparison questions compared to relevant questions, and went on to advise that he felt the case information for this testing process was adequate. There was some brief discussion about two different types of polygraph testing. One involves zone comparison testing, which Gelb had developed during his career, and one was referred to guilty knowledge testing. The second type of examination reportedly involved evidence-connected questions that were asked about a case. Wood indicated that this type of polygraph was extremely difficult to prove truthful. Wood advised that portions of the testing process had been video and audio taped, and that he had offered to have the FBI observe the examinations. The offer had been declined by the Boulder Police Department. Copies of the test results... Oh, this part. Yeah, they told him about 48 hours before the tests were about to happen, and public offices don't have money for flights like that. So rich people outriched some poor police department, and now they're calling them a shit police department because they didn't show up within a 48-hour notice. Wood advised that portions of the testing process had been video and audio taped, and that had been offered to have the FBI observe the examination. The offer had been declined by the Boulder Police Department. Copies of the test results would be faxed to the Boulder DA's office as well as to Chief Beckner, and Wood indicated that he was waiving the attorney privilege that would allow investigators to question Gelb about his testing procedures. In total, Wood indicated that Gelb had administered 5 polygraph tests to John and Patsy Ramsey and self-declared that they had passed them all. This was following the inconclusive test. Within a few hours of the Ramsey's press conference, Chief Beckner told the media that the investigation into John Ramsey's murder would proceed unaffected. The fact that the parents had passed an examination by a private professional in the field of polygraph tests held little sway in the minds of law enforcement officials who were directing the inquiry into the murder of John Benet Ramsey. Neither positive nor negative tests would ever make their way into the criminal court of law, and that's very fair. I appreciate that, Boulder Police Department. In spite of this response, the Ramseys and their attorney were pleased that they could not point to a positive test result that seemed to suggest that they had no personal involvement in the death of their daughter. On June 3rd, the Ramseys posted a psychic's composite sketch of a possible suspect in the murder of John Benet on the website and foundation they established in 1997. The sketch was on a work done by a psychic, Dorothy Allison, who had passed away in 1999. Allison was reported to have developed her vision on a perpetrator during a 1998 appearance on a network television program. The website reportedly asked, "Have you seen this man? This man may have been in the Boulder area in December 1996. We firmly believe that this is the most horrible of killers and will be caught on based on the information provided by people who care about the right and wrong. Please help so that another innocent child will not be victim and another family will not have to suffer undeniable grief." Chapter 18, A New Direction. Topic, December 17th, 2001. City of Boulder, Ramsey expense memo. On the above captioned date, Chief Mark Beckner released a summary of expenses as they related to the JonBenét Ramsey homicide investigation. The department had been providing this information on the annual basis to the media and following its year-by-year summary of total expenses. In 1996, the overtime expenses were $20,340.80. Travel expenses were $248.38. Investigative expenses were $788.55. The total expenditures for the year were $21,377.73. This is important. This is what the taxpayers' dollars go towards. This is the amount of money the Ramsey family wasted trying to bullshit their way out of a paper bag. In 1997, the on-duty salary expense was $308,630,000.81. The overture expense of 3,929.5 hours was equal to $134,621.66. Travel expenses were $57,392.46. Investigative expenses were $30,830.08. The total expenditures to the taxpayers was $531,471.01. On 1998, the yearly on-duty salary expense was $562,149. $562,149.72. Overtime expenditure of 959 hours was equal to $37,540.46. Travel expenditures equaled $11,319.01. Investigative expenses equaled $19,946.74. Total expenditures equaled $630,956.93. For the year of 1999, the on-duty expenditures was $220,780.16. The overtime expenditures of 218.75 hours equaled up to $10,554.11. The travel expenditures were $3,842.91. Investigative expenses equals $3,010.70. The total expenditures for the year were $238,187.99. For the year of 2000, the on-duty expenditures were $133,648.28. The overtime expenditures were $4,898.78. Travel expenses were $3,157. Investigative expenses were $4,369.25. Total expenditures equaled $146,073.31. The 2001 on-duty expenditures were $100,033,624.66. The overtime expenses were $3,005.59. Investigative expenses were $550. Total expenditures for the year equaled $137,180.25. The report indicated that total expenditures related to the Ramsey homicide investigation for the years of 1996 through 2001 was $1,705,251.21. Why isn't John Ramsey paying for this? Supposedly he had the money. The conclusion of the 2002 brought a decision that would significantly change the direction of the investigation. In December 2nd press release issued by the city of Boulder, it was announced that Chief Beckner and DA Mary Keenan, later to become Lacey, had agreed that the Boulder County District Attorney's Office would assume responsibility for following up on new leads and other information developed in the murder case. The primary reason for this change is the attempt to further investigate in a positive manner. Chief Beckner, the interest of the Boulder Police Department has always been to do what is in the best interest of the investigation. This is a strategy to address concerns expressed by the Ramseys and their attorney that the Boulder Police Department is not following up additional leads. This may provide the Ramseys and their attorneys with greater comfort in forwarding what we have believed is new information or leads that need to be investigated. It is our concern that the changes in the dynamic of this investigation information maintained by the Ramseys will be forwarded to the DA's office for follow-up, stated Chief Beckner. Obviously, it is important in the investigative information you do not have access to. We also realize that a fresh look at the case from the time to time is healthy and could lead to new progress in the investigation. Beckner went on to say that he didn't care who or how who solved the case, and if this change in the investigation helped, then it was the right thing to do so. On June 14, 2003, the New York Times provided a brief update on the status of JonBenét Ramsey's murder investigation. The Boulder District Attorney, Mary Keenan, has hired a retired police detective, Tom Bennett, to lead her office's investigation into the 1996 death of a 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. Ms. Keenan's office took over the investigation in January, and in April she said that she believed that an intruder might have killed the girl. An early investigation by the Boulder police focused on John and Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's parents. The fact that the New York Times decided to print the brief update on the changing status of the Ramsey investigation only served to illustrate the continuing nationwide interest in the case. Primary to the investigation into the murder of JonBenét would remain in the hands of the Boulder County District Attorney's Office for 8 years. We're halfway through the book. I'm having a hard time doing this book today. My sister passed away a week before January, and her case has been moved from possible natural causes to potential homicide. I just spent a week talking to police and sitting in police cars like a fucking criminal. And none of it matters.